All right, well, thank you, Frank. I'm very excited to be here. You've had so many great names on this show. I am really flattered to be asked, so thank you. Thank you to everyone who's shown up here tonight. I appreciate the support. So I want to give you some information about myself. I am an artist and I have been working in photography and video for about 30 years now. I have been living, in a lot of places, but I lived in Houston, Texas for 18 years. And I'm mentioning this because it's actually showing up in a lot of my pictures. So that'll be kind of important, I guess. And then about a year ago, I left Houston and I left my teaching job at Rice University to come to New York City to live here and to pursue my fine art career, but also to expand my photography into editorial and commercial projects. So that's how I got here. And actually, I am in a studio right now. This is my art studio. It is at the EFA building. That stands for Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts. It's in the Garment District. And I live in Hell's Kitchen, which is super exciting. More about my bio, I would say that I have an MFA from RPI, which is Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And before that, I graduated from the École Cantonale d'Art de Lausanne in Lausanne, Switzerland. And I've won 4 artist grants from the Houston Arts Alliance. I've had solo shows at Diverse Works Houston, the North Carolina Museum of Art, 511 Gallery in New York City, Women and Their Work in Austin, Texas. And my photography is in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the University at Albany Art Museum, the Center for Photography at Woodstock, and the Albany Institute for History and Art. I've done residencies at the Banff Center for the Arts in Calgary, Canada, at the Center for Metamedia in the Czech Republic, the Vermont Studio Center, and the NARS Foundation, among others. So now I'll get into my project. So I'm going to talk about Flâneuse. This is my latest project, and that is the title. However, this is one of the first of my series photos. I started this as something very different. I was going to do a photo fashion shoot, and that was very new for me. So I decided to give myself an assignment, like a self-assignment, and that was going to be, I would have my models out about in the city wearing clothing, but at night as though they had just woken up and they were sleepwalking. I thought that'd be really cool because they could be in areas that were really contrasting with their clothing, right? So it could be kind of interesting and mysterious and strange and surreal all at once. So that was my idea. However, that proved to be kind of difficult. And so I had to set about doing some tests. So as photographers know that when you're going to do something that's difficult, you first do a test where you use other people, or you kind of get all the kinks out before you actually have your models that are being paid, or your client that's there to see you do it. So instead of models, I use myself because I was teaching full time and it was easier to just get myself to do it. And also at night, that's kind of hard to schedule people. But also, I also enjoyed getting the wardrobe together, because instead of going to a clothing store where I would get new stuff that I'd have to return the next day and be really precious about it, I actually went to thrift stores where I could just get anything and look for things that for me had a history and also some creative past to them. Like, who wore this before? And I love that creative, edge to this, because it really ignited some more narrative stories in me. And so everything in this picture that you're seeing here is from a thrift store. Every shoe, every shot you see in the future too, it's all thrift store garments or shoes, accessories, the hats and everything. Now, one of the challenges for me in this series was to shoot with artificial lighting, to shoot with a strobe or a speed light. And that is something I had avoided doing because as a fine artist, I really liked natural light And I shot a lot of things during the day. I did a lot of shoots in locations I didn't need strobes or, artificial lights. However, if you're going to do something like this, where you have a figure in front of a dark area and you can't control the lights of the dark area, you definitely need to bring your own lights. You have to be able to control this, or at least I wanted to, to get to get the effect I wanted. So I set about learning how to do that. And I took a fantastic class on using Flash from Nelson Bakerman, who was in the audience tonight. And he showed me ways to use it that are much more creative than I ever thought it could be. And that was really helpful. Now, I want to tell you guys, though, that for those who don't know, when you're doing this picture and you're just outside alone, you have to have a tripod. So that makes it more complicated, because then the light also needs a stand. So then you need a stand, a tripod, and your camera. All the gear becomes a little bit more than just shooting something else, right? So those are some of the challenges, and I'll go into some more in a little bit. So I found myself at night in these places that had the backgrounds that I liked. So they were dark, they were a little bit mysterious, but they were also in areas where I didn't have a permit. So they were public, or someone's private driveway, or like a commercial private space. And that always meant that I was kind of looking over my shoulder to see, how much time do I have to get this shot, to get my thing going. Right. But also, I was out alone at night wearing dresses and heels in public spaces, but, not mine. And I was doing everything I was taught not to do as a woman. And I had a whole car full of gear that was really expensive, and other things out, like my tripods, etc., that were also really expensive. So that really is sort of the gist of flaneuse, whereas flaneuse is a French word. It's a word for men who for centuries have been able to stroll through the streets and wander about day or night with their curiosity. Let me see what's going on, and just kind of have this freedom to explore. And these men are known as flaneurs. That's a French word. So the female version is flaneuse. And if you take, the flaneur, which you probably have heard of, and you flip the script, and you call, you put a woman in the place of the man, then suddenly it becomes a little bit strange. Like, well, what is that woman doing alone at night? Why is she wearing those clothes? She's suspect. Like, is she a prostitute? She's certainly vulnerable and possibly putting herself in harm's way. So this idea for flaneuse is really about, being a woman and being, having the freedom to go unaccompanied wherever you want. Now, another thing I love about photography is color. And I originally studied painting and drawing. As a fine artist, as a young artist, that's where I'm coming from, right? And I studied that, and I didn't really get into photography until I was in that Swiss art school. So for me, when I look at something like this scene, for example, in Houston, I see color, and I see some strange colors, and I love that. That really gets me excited. So that's really part of my, background too, is really the composition and the color.
Allison, if I could ask you, this moment where you went from I'm doing my beautiful work outside to taking it to another place of a woman's issue of being frightened or being in foreign locations, was it something that like snapped, and this is how my project is going to go moving forward? Like, what was the metamorphosis for you?
I think it was gradual. I mean, it was
gradual. Okay.
It was gradual. And, it took a few years. I mean, I started in 2019, and there are quite a few shots that I don't include anymore because they just don't fit, and it was the process. I'm really a process kind of person,
Yeah. And does that, I mean, is that terribly frustrating, or that just sort of the way it goes, that I have to take images out because they don't fit where I'm going now? I mean, how does that work for you?
It was different for me because I've done other series where I've thought about it first. This is one where it was the test for something else that struck me as I was doing that test. I said, "Wow, wait a minute, something feels intense for me here. I want to follow that intensity." And that's the difference. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess because I was the subject,
Right.
Other projects I've done things on animals and flowers and things like that. Yeah.
And I guess one other question. Nelson, as someone mentoring you in this project, how did the mentor help you go through this process?
He didn't mentor me in the project. He mentored me in the technical aspect of lighting,
Okay.
of Flash, using Flash.
Okay.
And then I went off and did my own project, but
Okay.
it was that technical knowledge
Right.
that was
Okay.
so freeing, actually. So after I moved to New York, I was living in, like I said, Hell's Kitchen, and it was warm, and I wanted to kind of, I didn't have like the central air that you have in Houston, So I went out to explore, and I got myself to the Hamptons. And here I am. This is a shot in the Hamptons where I'm actually in the parking lot, which I find kind of funny because that's like what I did in Houston, a lot of parking lots. But I want to point out that, the clothing that I got, that I choose for each shot is also important in terms of color. And as a painter, from the painting background, I would say I kind of paint with color, because if you were creating a painting with like green in the background, predominantly green or brown, adding a drop of orange would be really smart because orange is the complement of green. So that's kind of how I approach some of these things. And in fact, in Photoshop, I did tweak the sky to make it a little bit more green. This is another Hamptons shot. And in here, I'm actually throwing up a flower. And what I did was I bought a bunch of flowers for this purpose as props, because for one thing, they can add a pop of color, just like the orange goat. But for another thing, I love having things fly in the air or sort of caught in motion. And part of that, I think, is because of the freedom that I want to express as far as the concept of this. But I also kind of love how Flash can freeze things in motion. For me, that's like magic that never goes away. However, you can also do something with Flash, is that you can tell your camera to hold off, take the exposure, and then have the Flash go at the very last part of the exposure. So then things like in this picture, you can see the background of the waves. They are more fuzzy because they are not lit with a flash. I didn't have a flash, exposing them. That's from my other, well, anyway. So they look more painterly, in my opinion. And I like that, that they kind of recede but look painterly, whereas, the rose is sharp and the figure is sharp because they were, I focused the flash on those items, right? So another thing about my artistic eye, I would say, is that I do generally like places that are a little bit odd, and so I think this comes from my natural curiosity as an artist. But when I was younger and I was growing up in semi-rural New Jersey, it was really beautiful, but I also loved culture and I loved going to New York City. And as a kid in New Jersey, you go to play with a friend and they would say, "Oh, kids, go down in the basement and go, play there or play in the rec room." But after a while, I'd be like, "Okay, I'm done with the rec room. Like, let's go to the attic, where you might find something really weird and unexpected." Or if they said, "Okay, kids, go outside and play in the playground," I'd be okay with that for a while. But then I'd be like, "All right, let's go, keep going. Like after that, let's go check out that house. It's decrepit and abandoned behind the hedges, So scenes like this for me are generally like kind of interesting. I kind of want to just feel free to look around,
Fun.
Another way I approach my photography as an artist is, in some cases, I will actually Photoshop in a character. I've been doing that a lot less lately, because of my, increased technical expertise, I guess. But in some of the earlier shots in the series, I did, drop in the figure into this background. And for those of you who don't know, that means that, like, with the hat and the bag and all that, I took that picture and digitally erased everything around that figure and gently fuzzed out the edges so it looked realistic enough to believe that was part of that actual scene that I also photographed at another point. And then I added some shadow and all that kind of thing. So I have, good reason to feel vulnerable when I'm out at night. And doing the series was not just the theory of it, but actually practically, as I feared about this happened a few times that I was busted. And at one point, it was fairly innocuous. I was out at this parking lot, and I had been living near, I was living near it and watching it, and I thought no one was there. There was no building. It used to be a high school. So I went out there, set up my stuff, the stand and everything. And I was in my heels and the dress. And then I'm out working, and it's like 9 o'clock at night. No one was there. But all of a sudden, this car drives up and the lights are beaming at me. And I'm like, what is this? And it turns out to be a patrol car that said it was, security. And the security guy inside of it said, hey, what are you doing? And he was pretty chill about it. But that's when I noticed there was this little tiny camera way up in the sky. I hadn't noticed. So I had to kind of wrap that up and leave. I got some shots out of it, but, then I went to another location where it wasn't so friendly. I was there at night, and I thought, okay, I'd also been familiar with the area near my apartment, and I set up, I was like, okay, there's definitely no one going to bust me here, because it just looked like an abandoned old nightclub. And, it looked boarded up to me, like it hadn't been used in years. And then also COVID had struck. So no one was going out.
I put them out in my back to put them out, though. Nope.
And so, like, no one was going out, and much less at 2 a.m. And also, I felt so comfortable. I brought my 4x5 camera. And so I had that out on its, tripod, and working away, doing things. And then gets later and later, but I'm not even looking at the time. I'm enjoying myself. I start at one location, move to the other. And this car, all of a sudden, 4x4 pickup trucks show up, and they stop and they park and they beam right at me. Everybody puts their headlights right in my face. And these guys get all puffed up and walk towards me. And they're like, what are you doing here? And none of them had like a security guard thing on them, but I just kept saying, like, I'm an artist. And they said that people had complained about the noise of their nightclub and that I was photographing their nightclub. And I couldn't believe it. So I said, no, I'm not doing that. And apparently, they had seen from earlier shots when I was on that property that, I had taken pictures. So I finally convinced them that I was just an artist, but they really had a hard time believing. They kept saying, there's nothing here. What are you taking pictures of? So that was pretty scary. I will point out the picture later of which one that was. So the previous shot and this one were both taken in Houston at night, and I did not doctor the color of the sky. This is how it looked. Houston is crazy. It has, it's the oil and gas, center, and they love to use artificial light. They love using energy. And so there's always, things lit at night. So they have these bridges going over a highway, and the bridges for the holidays were programmed to have all these really colorful lights going on. So they had them, one had the red lights, and the next one had these blue and green ones. And the night that I saw that all this fog had rolled in, I just said, oh, I have to go out and take a picture of this. This is just too crazy. So it is how it looked. Another thing I love about photography is that it is it is cinematic, and it lends itself really well to mystery. And I love a good mystery. And when I take a picture, there's always something happening on the left or right side or up or down, of that frame. So when the viewer looks at my pictures, I want them to kind of wonder about that too. So in some cases, I'll bring my props and I'll just leave them. And I want the viewer to not have a direct answer to what's happened, but to have this sense of mystery, to kind of wonder like what's going on there, or, what's off screen, what just happened. Okay, so this is where the guys in the pickup trucks showed up. And this is what I was wearing. So needless to say, I felt quite vulnerable. And by the time they stopped their cars, I had like an old raincoat on me. It was crazy. I also discovered, that the Hudson Valley of New York has this beautiful nighttime sky, which I had no idea until I went up there during the summer and rented an Airbnb at this motor lodge. And the motor lodge is old, and I didn't know it was that old, but it really was old. And it had just been sold, and the woman who bought it was redoing it, part by part, a little bit here and there, and was renting out some of the cottages on the property, but not all of them because she hadn't finished. The sky was incredible. And I thought, wow, this is such a contrast to Houston, where there's so much artificial light, and here there was so little, there was so much natural light. It was incredible. I loved it. So I did some shooting, and I realized that I didn't even need my strobe. I mean, I had it with me, but I didn't even need it. I did everything with long exposure, and took advantage of some of the light that was coming from the main house off to the left. And that's all I needed. So not all the cottages, like I said, were rented out. And so this one, the one behind it, they were still being worked on. So they were totally empty, and there was no lights going on inside. And it was really fun to just play around with that area, take advantage of that quietness. Another thing that I thought was too good to be true was the actual history of this place. The owner told me that after she bought it, the locals told her that it was haunted. It was haunted, and that the main house was haunted. And she said she didn't know, but her husband had been there one night, and he said he heard a ghost on that top floor. So now they never sleep on the top floor of that house. No.
Where upstate was this?
Well, it was near Hudson itself, but it was in Cairo.
Sure.
Okay.
Exactly where that is. My dad was born in the town of Catskill, which is right next door.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, this pool, let me tell you, really pretty creepy. I mean, it was like pitch black, except for that little light in there. So this is a nice long exposure. And to mention too that, I'm working in the tradition of photographers who do staged photography, like Jeff Wall and Cindy Sherman and many, many others. And so I am not taking self-portraits. I'm not taking portraits. I am in character, and I am portraying the role of the woman at night alone. And so some of the clothes are, like I said, like I said before, it helps me get into character. So some of them are younger than I would wear. The style is younger, or it's flashier, things like that. But having said that, I do think that, as an artist, that your life always gets into your artwork somehow. And in my case, I have had incidences at night that were quite scary for me. One happened when I was young, in my teens, and I was in Providence, Rhode Island for the summer. And there had been some stories about a rapist who would attack women after he'd been following them in the city. And so one morning I went out, I was just curious, and I was walking around the city, and I noticed a man following me, and I got really scared. And it happened to be Sunday around the time when church was out, like, because I saw this church and people were there, the door was open. So I just went inside and waited until I saw that man pass by. It was quite, it really rattled me. And then years later, when I was in Paris living there, I was on a subway train, and this man stared at me, and he kept staring, and I got this really weird feeling from him. And I got off the train and I walked out, and he followed me. And I got onto the streets and he kept following me. So finally I just stopped and said, "What do you want?" And he said, he was really surprised because I turned really abruptly and asked him, and he said, "A cigarette." I said, "Well, I don't smoke." And he stopped following me. But, I didn't know that. I learned later, yes, that's what you're supposed to do. But I didn't know that. That was just instinctive. And luckily I did do that. At another time in Paris, when I was living in another area, I used to love walking home at night because it's Paris. It is beautiful. And I love walking. And so I would have, I had a friend, and I would always walk home from, hanging out and enjoy that 40-minute walk. And I would get back to my apartment. And this one night, I get back to the apartment. There's only one way in. There's one big door. And in front of that door, there was a man who was exposing himself. And I was terrified, and it was late. And so, I had to get the police. And the same police that showed up were the same ones who a minute before had been looking at me with suspicion and wondering what I was doing alone at night walking. So luckily, that ended up well. They helped me out. But I also want to mention that even today, there's a woman in the UK who was murdered walking home alone at night just after hanging out with a friend and going home to her boyfriend. And she was murdered by an active duty cop, so that's really terrifying. Women have never been safe alone at night, but right now during COVID, it's actually gotten worse. And women have reported, UN report claims that, women are seeing a lot more sexual harassment now, both in the home and out. So knowing that, as a woman, as an artist, anyone who's working in this way of wanting to, encounter the world on your own terms, it makes me really pissed off knowing that doing that for a woman is a dangerous thing. However, at the same time, this series has really helped me kind of confront some things and helped me actually kind of take back the night in my own terms. And, I've done things safely, but I've had some encounters that have been a little bit iffy, but it still has gotten me to go out and do things that I normally wouldn't do. And I really enjoyed it. Like, going to the beach at 10 o'clock at night, where I parked illegally, but, it simply said, look, you need a pass or something to park here, but it was late. It was off season. I figured, why not? As I was on the beach, there were a couple other people that showed up, and there would be these flashlights in my face, and I put mine up in their face, and we had these like flashlight face-offs. But it turned out everyone who did that was the same as me. We just kind of were curious people, and they also parked illegally, but they wanted to go to the beach. They wanted to see what was going on, because there was actually a really cool thunderstorm coming in with lightning, and it was really beautiful. And I thought, that's interesting. We're all here. We just want to see something that's really cool and beautiful. So we were sharing that moment. And for me, the positive side of this is it's been really quite empowering.
So Allison, there's a piece of this that you're tempting faith, right? But you're also not backing down. So how do you thread the needle to say, I can do everything I want to do? Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I can't do it, and I can't be, or I'm forcing myself, or are you just not afraid? Like, how do you play that out in your head?
I am afraid. And there is a fine line between, taking risks and actually just, really putting myself in harm's way. I do think now with social media, having a camera can be somewhat useful. People don't want to be videotaped or photographed because it can show up, it can identify them. At the same time, I am always looking over my shoulder, like I said, when I do these, and I'm careful about it. But yeah, I think it's still something I struggle with. I mean, I don't feel free to go anywhere.
So is fear a motivating factor for you?
It's motivating the series to stand up and say, it's not okay.
Right. So where do we go with this project?
Well, I'm now starting to look at incorporating other people in it, volunteers, other people that might want to be in the pictures, other women.
And I mean, there are, of course, other groups that have the same fear in society, right? Transgender
Yes.
folks, all of that. I mean, that lends itself to going into a whole bunch of different categories, right?
Yes, I think what you're saying is exactly, female identified, people who feel vulnerable, definitely, I think could definitely, identify with this series. And yeah, because it's similar, it's.
And how will you reach out to other folks? What do you have a plan on that yet?
Not really. No, I'm not quite sure yet how to do that. And if there are people here in the audience who are interested, please use my email or Instagram to get in touch, or the chat if you want. Yeah. Or if you have suggestions on how to, maybe people who might want to.
So also, would you ever think, I mean, so do we see this as a book? Do we see this as, what do we see? Do we see it as a social essay? Do you coordinate maybe with a writer to put some of your thoughts down? I mean, do you think of collaborating with a writer?
Yeah, that would be really interesting. I haven't thought about doing that with just generically. I have thought though of doing something with a newspaper or magazine where they might want to hire me to do something in this vein for maybe another group, or for another subject, or maybe for women who have had things happen to them.
Yeah, Carrie Job she'll contact you, somebody who's interested in volunteering.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you, Carrie.
So Carrie, you have that information. Any other questions? Just drop them into the chat room. So when do you see, or do you ever put a timeline on when the project should end? Or is it just open-ended and you'll know when it's over?
I think I'll know when it's over. Having said that, I think I would like to get another at least 20,
okay,
really strong images. And I am interested in the book format. I love that idea, but I would like to get a lot more. I think it could be a lot, it could be bigger. And right. I think more would be interesting.
And do you think at this point you'll no longer be in the images? It'll be you shooting somebody, so that gets into direction and the creativeness of your subject, right? I mean, that becomes a different way of operating, right?
Yeah, it really does. I'm just excited to see where that goes, and I have to try it first and find out. But I think it could be really cool. Yeah.
So Frank, can you hear me?
Nelson, yes.
Yeah. So you should know that Allison does video installations. That's her main thing. It's some incredible video installations. Obviously, she's not showing it here tonight, but I don't know if you have it on your website, Allison.
Yeah, I do. I have another website that's just AllisonHunter.com, where I have a lot of the video stuff.
Yeah, and that's where she's done a lot of museum shows and gallery exhibitions and stuff, and projections on walls and really cool stuff.
Well, then Nelson just invited you to come back to do, whenever you're ready to show that, we would love to have you. In fact, Nelson has committed to presenting here as well, which would be great.
Oh, that'd be
Which
great.
would really be great. Nelson is a wonderful creative friend. So
Yeah.
that would be great. That would be great.
Oh, thank you.
So, Allison, that was great. Thank you so
thank
very
you.
much. So you can, if anyone else has any questions, you can put them in the box there. Allison will be staying on. She can answer them. Yeah, a lot of great feedback. So we'll take a short break. We can yak with each other and grab a glass of water or a glass of wine, and we will be back in. Give us like 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll have Sumita jump on. Okay. Thank you so much, Allison. Thanks, Nelson. I appreciate that.
Sure, no worries.
Okay. Okay. Let me just jump up.
Good job, Allison.
Thank you. Thank you, Nelson. It's great to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Allison. That was
Oh,
wonderful to watch.
thank you.
Scary to hear some of your stories, but lovely to watch.
Hey, I'm still here. Thanks for watching.
So do you know Lynn Stiles?
No, I don't.
Lynn Stiles, I think her name is. She was teaching at ICP. I think she's been on Frank's show here,
Uh-huh.
and she photographs only at nighttime. Been doing it for years. She published her own book. Next time you come, I'll show you her book.
Yeah, I'd love to see.
Yeah, she did it with, I don't know who the publisher was, but she published her own book. And she brings a friend with her. She just photographs like nightscapes,
Mm.
right? Frank, you had Lynn on. Lynn
Lynn.
Stiles, I think her last
Yeah.
name is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
she just nighttime, long exposure, but similar stuff. But you now include yourself or somebody in the picture, right? Where she doesn't do that. They're just these wonderful sort of cityscapes and things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll send you a link to her Instagram or something.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Oh, there's her name. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Check her out.
Oh, thank you. I will.
Yeah. She does really long exposures, so she has a lot more detail in the shadows and things.
All right.
Allison, I sent you a message so we can talk
Oh, great.
about your
Thanks.
project.
Oh, yeah. I'll download the chat too.